Welcome to the deep dive. We dig through the sources so you don't have to, pulling out the key insights you need. Today, we're diving into Ondo Finance. It's a really interesting platform, kind of a pioneer in bridging traditional finance assets with blockchain tech, and of course, its own Ondo token. Our goal here is pretty straightforward. Unpack how Ondo actually works, figure out its unique spot in this whole booming RWA that's real-world asset space, and look at what the market's doing and what that might mean for Ondo's future.
And it's a future that looks, well, potentially huge. I mean, the whole market for tokenizing assets, which is exactly where Ondo plays, is forecasted to hit something like $15 trillion by the end of the decade. So Ondo isn't just, tagging along. It seems really strategically placed to grab a piece of that growth. Definitely something worth watching if you're into that finance and blockchain intersection.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. For someone maybe new to Ondo, just trying to get their head around this part of the market.
Right.
What is Ondo Finance like at its heart? What problem is it actually trying to fix?
Right. So at its core, you could think of Ondo Finance as kind of an open, decentralized bank. It launched back in 2021. Its main thing, its primary focus, is really improving the connection between DeFi, decentralized finance, and TradFi, traditional finance. And it does that by tokenizing real-world assets. So things like bonds, ETFs, exchange-traded funds, bringing them onto the blockchain. The big idea, the real insight maybe, is to make institutional-grade financial products way more accessible, democratize access, and offer new kinds of solutions investors just couldn't get before.
That's a pretty big ambition. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, and probably for you listening too. How does Ondo actually do that? Tokenize these assets, and what are the advantages? Like, what's in it for you as an investor or just someone curious? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, good question. RWA tokenization, it's essentially creating a secure digital version of a physical asset right on the blockchain. Think of it like a digital wrapper. And that wrapper makes the asset, much easier to trade, enhances liquidity, and opens it up to a much wider, often global audience. Ondo has a few key products that show this really well. Okay, first up, there's OUSG. That's the Ondo Short-Term U.S. Government Bond Fund. So this is a token, and it's backed by actual short-term U.S. Treasury securities. Now, it's important to note it's only issued to qualified purchasers. There are strict KYC and accreditation checks involved. But the real kicker here is it brings things like BlackRock's BUIDL fund or Franklin Templeton's products, these institutional grade things, directly onto the blockchain for those eligible investors. And what's really smart is how its value works. The token's intrinsic value actually goes up a tiny bit every single day, automatically tracking the net asset value, the NAV of the fund underneath it.
Yeah.
It's managed professionally, of course. It's almost like the yield just keeps adding up in your token. And another key thing, the fees are pretty transparent and competitive. So management fees are even waived until July 2025, which is, a nice little bonus for early adopters. Oh, and you can also convert OUSG into this thing called ROUSG. That's a rebasing version, which is cool because your actual token balance goes up over time as the yield comes in, like automatic compounding right in your wallet. Then you've got USDY. That stands for US dollar yield. This one's a yield-bearing stablecoin, but it's designed specifically for non-US users, both individuals and institutions. It's backed by the interest earned from short-term US Treasuries and also bank deposits. And again, the interest builds up daily, so you're earning yield automatically just by holding it. The yields are pretty decent too, typically floating around, say, 4.25% or maybe even 5.1% APY, which for a stablecoin is quite attractive. And just like OUSG, USDY has its own rebasing version, RUSDY. So the key difference between OUSG and USDY really comes down to who they're for. USDY is more for like open circulation, retail use, maybe it's positioned as a stablecoin. OUSG, on the other hand, is built for instant liquidity, but in a permissioned institutional setting. It acts more like a tokenized share of a fund. And just quickly, there's also a third product, OMM tokens. These are backed by U.S. money markets, MMFs, offering a bit more diversification and the yields from those funds.
Okay, so it's definitely more than just these tokens then, right? Right. It sounds like there's a whole ecosystem. What does that wider Ondo world look like? How do all these bits and pieces, connect?
Yeah, absolutely. It's designed as a whole system focusing on function and, importantly, trust. A really key part is Flux Finance. Flux Finance basically acts as a lending service within the Ondo ecosystem. It lets users borrow stablecoins, which is useful. But here's the smart integration. They can use their tokenized U.S. Treasury bonds, like OUSG, as collateral. And that's a big deal. OUSG holders can get liquidity, cash, without selling their underlying assets. And borrowers get pretty competitive interest rates because, well, the collateral is super stable U.S. Treasuries. Another piece is the Ondo chain. That's their own layer 1 blockchain, but it's permissioned and built with compliance in mind. Although it's worth noting, while OUSG is available on chains like Ethereum, Polygon, and Solana, most of the actual issuance, the vast majority, happens on Ethereum. They're leveraging its, established security and network. And this whole ecosystem, it's really built on partnerships, strategic collaborations. Ondo works with centralized exchanges, OTC desks, DeFi protocols, all to make sure there's good liquidity for their tokens. But what I think really stands out are the partnerships with the big reputable names, custodians and asset managers. We're talking BlackRock, Morgan Stanley, Ankara Trust, Clear Street, NAV Consulting. These relationships are absolutely crucial for asset safety, obviously, but also just for building that investor confidence, especially when you're dealing with tokenized traditional assets. It's still a new world for many. So to sum it up quickly, the platform uses this tranche system, basically categorizing investments by risk and return, different lanes for different appetites, you could say. And underpinning it all are smart contracts. They make things efficient, transparent, cut out middlemen, which boosts security and cuts down on transaction costs.
Right. Okay. So we've got the core products, the ecosystem, the partnerships. What about the Ondo token itself? What's its actual job in all this? And how does it, empower you, the user, give you a say?
Yeah, the Ondo token is, it's central to the whole Ondo Finance system. Its main job is governance. Yeah. So what that means is if you hold Ondo tokens, you get to participate in making decisions about the platform's future. You can influence things like protocol upgrades, economic settings, other important stuff, all through the Ondo DAO. That's their decentralized autonomous organization. It's basically your vote. And the governance process itself, it's pretty structured. It happens in 2 stages. First, there's a discussion phase that happens on the Flux Finance forum. And you actually need quite a lot of tokens, 100 million Ondo, just to put forward a formal proposal. So it filters for serious ideas. Then if a proposal gets through that, it goes to an on-chain vote. That lasts for 3 days and needs a quorum, 1 million Ondo tokens voting yes, basically, for it to pass and be adopted. Tokenomics-wise, the total supply is fixed, capped at 10 billion Ondo tokens. The initial unlocked supply was 1.4 billion. And a pretty big chunk, 52.1%, is earmarked for ecosystem growth. That's all about incentivizing people to use the platform, participate, help build out the community. The token launched publicly in January 2024, starting around 9 cents, I think, and it really took off pretty fast, multiplied like 10 times in just 5 months by June 2024. It hit a market cap over $1 billion not long after launch, got into the top 100 cryptos globally. Its all-time high, that was $2.15 back on December 16th, 2024. It started on Ethereum, leveraging its security, but they've strategically expanded. It's now on other chains like Solana and Cosmos too, just to broaden its reach and usability.
Okay, so you got all this innovation, these big partnerships. How has that translated into the Ondo token's market performance? I'm getting the sense there might be some interesting, maybe even conflicting signals in the numbers.
Yeah, the market data here, it definitely paints an interesting, maybe complex picture. I mean, while Ondo hit those impressive highs and grew really fast earlier in the year, more recently, it's faced some pretty significant bearish pressure. For example, looking back over the last 6 months or so, there's been a drop of nearly 60% from its peak. Though, context is key. It's still up a solid 151% from its all-time low. So volatility, yes, but also pretty significant growth since it first launched. But there have been some really strong catalysts pushing it too. That partnership with Visa, for instance, integrating a stable coin for programmatic access to Treasury yields, that definitely got a lot of attention. We also saw a big spike in whale activity, large holders buying in, and new wallets being created, like over 390% growth in wallets in just one day back in March. There was one notable whale purchase of almost 11 million Ondo for about $17 million worth of Ethereum. Plus, there's reported institutional interest. I think Donald Trump backed World Liberty Financial, bought some, and growing open interest in Ondo futures, which kind of suggests new money might be coming into the market. Now, looking at the technical analysis side, the overall feeling right now is generally bearish. A lot of the indicators are pointing towards negative forecasts. The RSI, the Relative Strength Index, it's sitting kind of neutral, but some analysis suggests it might have been overbought before, which, could increase the risk of the price correcting further down. Ondo also recently broke below a key upward trend line, entering a more volatile period. It's nearing some important support around the $1.70 mark. To really turn bullish again, analysts say it needs to decisively get back above that Zerva 89 to $1 zone. Oh, and interestingly, it tends to move somewhat in line with the broader crypto market, positively correlated with the top 10 and top 100 coins, excluding stable coins, of course. Okay, price predictions. Always have to add the disclaimer here, right? Take these with a grain of salt. They're just forecasts based on current data and models. Short term, some analysts are predicting a potential dip, maybe down towards the 0.1157 mark within the next month or so. For the whole of 2025, the forecast suggests it might trade in a range, maybe averaging around 0.59. Some even think investors might see an opportunity to short Ondo, anticipating that dip. But looking further out, the outlook often gets more bullish. Some projections see potential for significant gains later on, maybe average prices climbing to around $1.23 by 2026, and even higher down the road, potentially around $1.47 in 2029, maybe pushing towards $1.93 by 2030. The highest algorithmic guess I've seen goes way out to 2050, suggesting maybe around $21, but definitely no predictions of hitting $100 or $1,000. And it's also fair to point out, looking back just over the last year, investing in Ondo Finance hasn't actually been profitable historically. It showed a decrease of about 37%. So yeah, a mixed bag.
That is a really thorough look at the numbers. Definitely highlights those short-term challenges against maybe some longer-term optimism. So stepping back, what really stands out to you about the whole picture? What are the biggest upsides, maybe the biggest risks or pitfalls the listeners should keep in mind?
Well, what's really striking is kind of the dual nature of it all. The pros are pretty strong, I think. You've got these genuinely innovative financial products, really building that bridge between TradFi and DeFi, and they're tapping into what seems to be a growing global demand for tokenized assets. Yeah, the market's hit some headwinds recently, but the project did show strong technical performance earlier, and you can't ignore the clear institutional interest and that rising open interest in futures. The core idea, making things like U.S. Treasuries accessible, offering decent yields like USDY's 5-ish% APY, that's compelling. Plus, the aim for lower volatility compared to pure cryptos, the decentralized governance, and those big-name partnerships, they definitely add legitimacy. But, that immediately raises the question, what about the downsides? What are the challenges? And there are definitely some significant ones. You've got the inherent volatility of the crypto market itself. Prices can swing wildly, unpredictably. There's always that risk of a further price drop, especially if technical signals point to it being overbought, like we mentioned. Regulatory risk is huge in this space. Regulations are still evolving, and changes could seriously impact how Ondo operates. It's a major uncertainty. And like any crypto investment, there's high inherent risk. You could lose your capital. That's always true. Technically, Ondo needs to break through those resistance levels to get back on an upward path. And its link to traditional markets is kind of a double-edged sword, right? It benefits from the stability, but it's also exposed if there's a crisis in TradFi. Plus, it might be a bit complex for totally new users. There are always technical risks, smart contract bugs, security holes. And let's face it, the project is still relatively young. The token only launched in January 2024. Lots still to prove.
Okay, so for someone who's listened to all this and they're intrigued, maybe they want to explore Ondo Finance a bit more, perhaps even get some Ondo tokens. What are the practical steps? How do you actually do that? And what are the really important things to keep in mind about, accessing it and the legal side of things?
Right. If you're looking to actually acquire Ondo, there are a few main ways. You could use a multi-currency wallet, something like Trust Wallet, and swap Ethereum for Ondo directly within the wallet. Usually involves selecting swap, making sure you have ETH in the from and Ondo in the to, entering the amount, and following the prompts. Another very common route is using a centralized exchange, or CEX, like BitGet, for example. That typically means setting up an account, doing the KYC, know your customer verification, depositing funds, maybe buying a stable coin like USDT first, then going to the spot market, finding the Ondo USDT pair, and placing your buy order. Some exchanges also offer futures trading for more advanced users. And then there are decentralized exchanges, DEXs, like Uniswap. For that, you'd need a compatible wallet like MetaMask. Make sure you have some ETH in it to cover gas fees. Connect your wallet to Uniswap. Find the right trading pair, Ondo DDT or Ondo. Put in how much you want to trade and confirm the transaction. Just be mindful of those network fees on Ethereum especially. And once you have Ondo, storing it securely is, well, absolutely crucial. Hardware wallets, like Ledger, are generally seen as the gold standard for security. They keep your private keys totally offline, safe from online threats. Software wallets, Trust Wallet, MetaMask, Taurus. They're more convenient for everyday use, but inherently less secure than hardware. Basic security hygiene is key. Use two-factor authentication wherever possible, guard your recovery phrase like gold, keep it offline and safe, and just be super vigilant about phishing scams. They're everywhere. As for other ways to get Ondo, maybe without buying directly, well, you could participate in governance, but remember that high threshold for submitting proposals. Keep an eye out. where you might earn rewards you could convert to Ondo, or you could potentially reinvest the yield earned from Ondo's products like USDY back into Ondo, although that depends on availability and your strategy. Now, this definitely brings up the important question. What about legality and regulation? This is critical. Ondo operates right at that tricky intersection of crypto and traditional finance. It's complex territory. On one hand, its links to regulated instruments, those partnerships with big names like Morgan Stanley and BlackRock, they give it a certain legitimacy. But, and this is a big but, the legality really varies depending on where you live, your jurisdiction. Tokenizing real assets throws up specific legal questions about ownership, securities laws, and a lot of this is still being figured out by regulators. So the strongest advice here is definitely consult with an independent legal advisor who understands both crypto and finance law in your specific country or region before you invest. That's not just boilerplate, it's really essential guidance here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as we've really dug into today, Ondo Finance is clearly playing a fascinating pioneering role, trying to connect traditional finance and blockchain through these real-world assets. We've explored its whole ecosystem, the governance power of the Ondo token, and that really interesting mix of market forces, institutional buzz, and technical charts shaping its path. It definitely holds a unique and dynamic spot in this whole RWA sector as it evolves.
Absolutely. And maybe if we zoom out for a final thought, as that line between TradFi and DeFi keeps getting blurrier, as more real-world stuff finds its way onto the blockchain, what new opportunities does that create? But also, what new challenges might pop up for you, the everyday investor, trying to navigate this constantly shifting landscape?
That's definitely something to chew on as you continue your own exploration. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.